my heart, and it begins this way. I was born by the river in a little tent, and just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes, it will. Said I go to my brother, and I say, brother, brother, help me, please. But when I go to my brother, y'all hear winds up knocking me back down on my knees. There's been times when I thought I wouldn't last for long, but somehow I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long, yeah, a long time coming, but a change gon' come. Oh, yes, it will. See, there's been times when I thought I wouldn't last for long, but somehow I'm able, God, to carry on. It's been a long, time you are so amazing. God bless.
Hey everyone, and happy Juneteenth. Um, I thought that would be a really great way to start this live stream off, um, where I plan to talk about some issues surrounding dogs, and some of the more serious types of offenses. I was thinking about like the very first time I ever spoke about my views on dogs, on YouTube was on a 4th of, I think it was on the 4th of July. And people, every 4th of July now, people are always like, oh, please don't pop fireworks. Think of my dog. Like, my dog hates the sound of fireworks. He gets so scared. And it's kind of a funny and ridiculous issue that people bring up with regards to dogs. But as we all know, there are much more serious, I guess, types of topics that should be discussed when it comes to dogs. Uh, so I have some articles I wanted to go through. Um, I think I touched on this one last year on Juneteenth, but I thought it was worth taking another look at. So it is a palimpsest. I don't know what this word means, on policing, animality, and blackness. So, and it's got some pretty, I think, great artwork in this, depicting kind of dogs actually being used for what they were used for. They weren't nanny dogs, they weren't babysitting children, they weren't, I don't know, being these mystical, angelic creatures. They were being used to hunt down human beings and commit acts of violence and oppression. They were known in the circumatlantic slaveholding world as Cuban bloodhounds, known and feared. Specially trained to hunt runaways during the 19th century, these dogs became useful tools for capturing unruly, quote, property, essential weapons in the plantation's carcelary order. Yet, to turn these creatures into vicious instruments for the domination and punishment of enslaved humans required inflicting cruelty upon the dogs themselves. Here's where okay, I guess they have to say that, but I don't think you need to inflict cruelty on dogs for them to just naturally want to hunt down and kill anything really, but including people. So, it's kind of ignoring that line. Um, okay, so they were starved and beaten supposedly to fuel their bloodlust. Which again, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think these things do that good enough on their own. But these bloodhounds were transformed into prostheses of the enslaver's will to mastery. And then here's an image that's described over here. So this is painted during the U.S. Civil War, and it's Thomas Moran's monumental canvas, Slave Hunt, Dismal Swamp, Virginia, 1862. It depicts hounds chasing a runaway family through a hostile, spectral landscape in Virginia. Dismal was one of many swamps near southern plantations that served as sites of escape and refuge, however inhospitable, for those desperately seeking freedom. So, and I skipped this paragraph, but I want to go back to it. So, pictorial renderings of dogs' role in runaway hunts offer some of the most enduring visual idioms of enslavement. Their uncanny historical echoes and re-embodiments stand as testaments to the centuries-old challenges to visualizing Black freedom. Here is I think zooming in here. So here, the dogs suspended at full leap and just before their mortal attack provide the central fulcrum for the chase, which proceeds diagonally from the painting's upper right to lower left. In the right background, there are slave hunters, barely visible as dark, ghostly silhouettes next to a tree trunk. In Moran's visual fabulation, dogs and hunters seem to merge with the earthy tones and shadowy overgrowth of the landscape, one in which nature seems to signify and even collude with the ominous magnitude of the mercenary plantation police. And then, by contrast, the only figures fully discernible at first glance are the criminalized runaway family. Evoking the biblical flight from Egypt, their immediate identification is made possible by their brightly colored, if ragged clothing, as well as the light that breaks through the dense tree canopy. The couple look back toward danger, the man with a resolute, protective gesture, and the terrified woman clutching their child tightly. Knife and stick in hand, the man stoically prepares for confrontation, yet his blood-stained weapons and the red-daubed object in the water nearby suggest recent combat and perhaps the killing of another dog. This liminal moment leaves viewers suspended in painful anticipation of more violence to come. By the time of the U.S. Civil War, the use of dogs against enslaved people was an established target of critique for the movement to abolish slavery. So the abolitionists were also dog culture critics. That's pretty cool. I feel like we're definitely on the right side of history. Um, Abolitionists saw it as a manifestation of the animal brutality of the slaveholding regime. Both Moran's image and The Hunted Slaves, 1861, painted by his contemporary Richard Ansell, were part of anti-slavery campaigns. Unlike Moran's, however, this image completely detaches the hounds from their human center of command and demands viewers focus on the spectacular bodily conflagration between enslaved and animal. The precise anatomical rendering of the figures underlines their common physicality, most evident in the well delineated rib cages of the black warrior and the ravenous beasts. Compositionally, human and animal also mirror one another, but not as an analogy. The scene rather poses equivalences and identifications between the two. The axe wielded by the runaway, alongside clothing, is one of only a few elements that indexes the realm of human culture in a scene that otherwise conveys the dissolution of bodily borders between human and beast. Images like Ansell's occlude the social forces surrogated to dogs. They also render invisible the cultivation required to produce such savage instruments. With the specialized training of Cuban bloodhounds, dogs' metamorphosis into weapons for racial and colonial domination began to acquire the status of a science, a subfield of military and police science in particular. By 1911, the South African Police Dog Training Depot had become the world's leading center for that task, one crucial for the control of black lives under apartheid, and emulated by police departments in the United States and elsewhere. This later photograph portrays the supposedly rational efficiency of their schooling system. Dog and trainer fully upright, mirroring one another while exerting control over seated black subjects. This is so powerful, guys. And recall that I recently covered the ways in which the colonial project, the settler colonial project of the Zionist entity, is importing trained military dogs from Four Winds Canine in the Netherlands, literally to be used to uphold the apartheid state in Palestine. So it's this entire history of settler colonialism, imperialism, oppression, slavery. There's this thread of dogs being like woven into that, um, where they are a tool of the oppressor. The visual entanglements of blackness, policing, and dogs reached one of its most iconic moments in a memorable series of images taken during the Children's Crusade of 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. Considered a turning point in the U.S. civil rights movement, this campaign and the photographs of it by Bill Hudson and Charles Moore became emblems of an obscene social order now made visible. Again, I wish I was better at producing because I would juxtapose this with the images I've seen from Palestine today. Like, this is contemporary. And honestly, the civil rights movement wasn't that long ago, so this is within living memory as well. I think that's important to keep in mind. Um, Here, 16-year-old Walter Gadsden is viciously attacked by a police dog. The animal, trained to maintain a racist social order, seems to have a will of its own. Despite the disciplined visual fictions of apartheid dog training, it is precisely the unpredictability of the animal that ensures that the lawlessness of racist policing can never be kept entirely in check. Again, guys, pretty much every line of this series I'm going through of photos and text really is so well written. It needs to be uh, I don't know, I feel like I actually need to read these lines and then sit and think about them for a while. I just think it's very powerful. This time, though, unlike Moran's and Ansell's scenarios, the violence takes place under the watchful gaze of black witnesses, whose concerned demeanor subtly suggests the possibility of community action yet to come. For the 30th anniversary of the Children's Crusade, Birmingham transformed the area where the events occurred into a memorial park. The city commissioned the African American artist James Drake to create a sculptural program highlighting its most salient incidents. Rendered in realist forms, among the sculptures displayed is a figural group made of scrap iron that focuses solely on the animals. Police Dog Attack, 1993. Its configuration invites viewers to navigate through them, as if under siege themselves. Again, just look at this artwork. I mean, this is very salient for our, like what we're trying to, I guess, convey with a lot of our dog critique. Because while this episode is focusing on like the use of dogs kind of more formally in oppression, um, we all know everywhere we go all the time, we might run into a scenario like this with some like nutter's like out of control beast. So anyways, not to diverge from the topic. Significantly, rather than the German Shepherds used by the police in 1963, the breed in Police Dog Attack resembles the hounds that so haunted enslaved subjects in the 19th century. Like a palimpsest, the sculpture evokes past visual images, such as the immobilized dog suspended in air in the liminal moment portrayed by Moran. It also suggests moments after in its future and our present, extending from Ferguson to Standing Rock and beyond, and to Palestine. In the violent embodied afterlives of slavery, threats to the humanness of black and racialized others continue to reverberate in the concealed bestiality of racist law and its displacement onto the animal. I'm gonna post this in the description or something somewhere because again, I think this is worthwhile spending some time with. Okay, what is this? Oh. Okay, I pulled up a few other articles that I thought might be interesting to go through. So this is from Black Voice News, October 4th, 2007. Slave owners' Negro dogs. A prominent slavery approach involved in the control and domination of African American slave was the use of highly trained so-called Negro dogs, bloodhounds, foxhounds, bulldogs, Scotch staghounds, I have no idea what that is, or curs, a mongrel, to track runaway slaves. The professional slave catchers provided their own Negro dogs and often allowed the dogs to give a fugitive a severe mauling. How, dude, oh my God. It's so, it's just so horrible to even think about. But this stuff still is going on. Oh, hey everybody in the chat. Thanks for joining. Hope you're enjoying your evening. I hope a lot of you got the day off. Um, yeah, so let's see. Yeah, this is so terrible. While patrollers and their dogs and okay, so sorry, I skipped a line here. I got lost in the article. Okay, so they chase down these people and then allow them to be severely mauled. This was a common practice in all slave states, defended and justified in the courts. White patrollers and their dogs, in the spirit of killing an animal for sport, like fox hunting, rode through swamps in search of fugitives. Oh my God. This is so much worse than I feel like we are not taught the true like depth and severity of the history of this country. Um, and reading it is I have a visceral reaction to this stuff sometimes. So, uh, when the slave was caught, he was whipped on the spot and taken back to the plantation where the slave owner punished him again. In one story, Uncle Isom, a very strong runaway, caught the leading hound and then beat the rest of the dogs. However, upon being overpowered by the white men, the dogs were allowed to bite off the victim's body parts. When returned to the plantation, Uncle Isom was given 300 lashes. This looks to be from maybe a book called Lay My Burden Down. So here's a reference to that. I can post all of these articles in the description if anyone's interested. I haven't read actually most of these through. I just started Googling and I found some that looked like they would be interesting. So I'm reading most of these for the first time right now. Okay. The generic training of Negro attack dogs went like this. The dogs were locked up and, quote, never allowed to see, I'm going to start saying black person, except while training to catch him. Dogs were given the scent of a black person's shoe or article of clothing and taught to follow the scent. Slaves were sent out as trainees. So am I reading this right? They just use slaves to train the like as human bait. The dog culture is sick, guys. It always has been sick. Like I think that's really one of the points I'm trying to get across here is that dogs have always been used by really sick people for really sick purposes. Um, and of course, we all know, we all talk about the other issues with dogs, like the barking, going everywhere, just the unhygienic diseases, like all of those things, like the biological stuff. But there is this side to dog culture too that is tied to extreme violence. And it really is hard for me to go through some of this stuff. Like I don't like it's terrible. But I think we have to learn about these things, and I think it's a really important piece of the dog critique puzzle that should be confronted, even though it's so harrowing and just disturbing. Okay, so when the dogs treed the slave, the dogs were given meat as a reward. Afterwards, they learned to follow any particular slave by scent because they were being used to, I guess, train them. Besides the patroller's readiness with the zest of sport, ugh, God, do you see how sick? I mean, these people, dog nutters, used dogs to kill animals. They use dogs to fight and kill other dogs. Like they love the violence that a dog can impose. It's kind of like that previous thing we just looked through. The like the racism gets imposed on that dog so they can these sick people can act out their feelings of racial hatred through the dog. Like the dog is a tool of violence. Okay, so these dogs were incredibly fierce, vicious beasts. If they were not constrained at the end of the quote chase, they would tear a man to pieces. This is, I think, another reference to a book, Runaway Slaves by Franklin. So all of this stuff is referenced and there are sources. This is real history. So once discovered, the slave was bound, beaten, and bloodied. This is from The Black Badge by Brady. Although the night watchers were replaced following slavery, their essence and practices were continued by the Ku Klux Klan, who existed in slavery but under different names. As evil and sadistic as the slave owners, Europeans, were to the slaves and their descendants, the question arises as to what reverberations did the police uh, Negro attack dogs have, not only on the slaves, but also on their descendants, up to this day. Black Americans know that the big picture was larger than just fearful slaves. Yeah, like we just went through, they continued to be used by the police during the um, civil rights movement. So, and as again, they're using them to oppress the Palestinians today. Like they're just a line of oppression involving dogs. Okay, let's see, where was I? Okay, let's see what we have. So here is a journal article from Past and Present, volume 246 from February of 2020. So not super old. This is the abstract. The lash and shackles remain two primary symbols of material degradation fixed in the historical memory of slavery in the Americas. Yet, as recounted by states, abolitionists, travelers, and most importantly, slaves themselves, perhaps the most terrifying and effective tool for disciplining black bodies and dominating their space was the dog. Just, again, pause and think about that for a second. This article draws upon archival research and the published materials of former slaves, novelists, slave owners, abolitionists, Atlantic travelers, and police reports to link the systems of slave hunting in Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, and the U.S. South throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Slave hounds were skillfully honed biopower predicated upon scenting, hearing, sighting, outrunning, outlasting, signaling, attacking, and sometimes terminating black runaways. These animals permeated slave societies throughout the Americas and bolstered European ambitions for colonial expansion, indigenous extirpation, economic extraction, social domination in slave societies. As dogs were bred to attack and hunt enslaved runaways, slave communities utilized resources from the natural environment to obfuscate the animal's heightened senses, which produced successful escapes on multiple occasions. This insistence of slaves' humanity and the intensity of dog attacks against black resistance in the Caribbean and U.S. South both served as proof of slavery's inhumanity to abolitionists. Examining racialized canine attacks also contextualizes representations of anti blackness and interspecies ideas of race. An Atlantic network of breeding, training, and sales facilitated the use of slave hounds in each major American slave society to subdue human property, actualize legal categories of subjugation, and build efficient economic and state regimes. This integral process is often overlooked in histories of slavery, the African diaspora, and colonialism. By violently enforcing slavery's regimes of racism and profit, exposing the humanity of the enslaved and depravity of enslavers, and enraging transnational abolitionists, hounds were central to the rise and fall of slavery in the Americas. Guys, is there any more powerful dog critique than that? I'm kind of speechless. Like, I don't know. This is kind of blowing my mind. Like I said, I have not read most of this before I started the live stream. I just kind of scanned and found some articles and headlines that looked interesting and wanted to talk about. I might need to. Okay, I'm not going to read this entire article right now live. I will post a link to this article, um, in the description if you guys want to go check it out. But this looks like it would be worth an entire video on its own. So I'm just gonna save this link for another live. Here is an article I found that looked really interesting from the Michigan Journal of Race and Law, volume 25, again from 2020. So, Man's Best Friend: How Dogs Have Been Used to Oppress African Americans by Chantel Stewart at the University of Alabama School of Law. Um, this has a citation with a link to Man's Best Friend: How Dogs Have Been Used to Oppress African Americans by Chantel Stewart. So is that a book or I'm not sure what that is, but you can look it up. I'll look it up later too. So her abstract here says the use of dogs as tools of oppression against African Americans has its roots in slavery and persists today in everyday life and police interactions. Due to such harmful practices, African Americans are not only disproportionately terrorized by officers with dogs, but they are also subject to instances of misplaced sympathy, ill suited laws, and social exclusion in their communities. Whether extreme and violent or subtle and pervasive, the use of dogs in oppressive acts is a critical layer of racial bias in the United States that has consistently built injustices that impede social and legal progress. By recognizing this pattern and committing to an intentional effort to end the devaluation of African Americans, the United States can begin to address the trailing paw prints of its racial iniquities. Guys, I feel like I'm kind of on fire tonight. Like, this, what an article. Let's just, again, I'm not going to read this entire article live right now, but here are the sections. So, section one is Negro Dogs, Slavery and the Civil Rights Era, which interestingly, I read that article a little while ago about that. Section two, The Prioritization of Dogs, Misplaced Sympathy. Section 3, Excessive Force, Use of Dogs by Police, which has several subsections: the history of dogs. Police dogs are disproportionately used against African Americans. Police dog training leads to increased dog attacks against African Americans. Police dogs are inherently inaccurate. Section 4, Dog law exhibits bias, inherently dangerous per se. Section 5, Social segregation, sacred grounds. Studies show that dogs help maintain racial boundaries in neighborhoods. Guys, the dog critic research has been done, okay? Like, Chantel Stewart has done the research for us. This might be worth an entire another video too. So, because it is, I don't know how many, it's fairly long and I'd like to really dig through it, so I can cover it better on a different video. Okay, here is an article from The Appeal. U.S. police dogs originated from slavery and must be abolished. The 13th Amendment bans all badges and incidents of slavery, but the use of police dogs enacts cruelty on both people of color and the dogs themselves. To fully rid society of slavery, the dogs must be retired. This is by Bina Ahmed and Kia Duggins from just in 2024. The 13th Amendment purported to abolish chattel slavery, along with what an 1883 Supreme Court decision called its badges and incidents. But the amendment left some infamous carve-outs. Namely, it remains legal to enslave people who have been convicted of a crime. But there is another remaining badge and incident of slavery that we must uproot. The police's use of canine units. The police's practice of using dogs to attack human beings derives from enslavers' practice of using slave hounds to attack enslaved people. This coercive history harms human beings and animals in order to perpetuate the racial and economic interests of people in power. One way we can honor the 13th Amendment's promise to rid our society of slavery, all of its badges and incidents, is by getting dogs out of policing. these are real. I don't know, guys. Let me know what you think in the chat. I feel like these are really strong arguments for things that we advocate for. Like, I want dogs to be removed from policing. I don't think dogs should be allowed to be used as a weapon. I don't think dogs should be allowed to be used by the military. I don't think dogs should be allowed to be used by the police. I don't think dogs should be allowed to be used by dog nutters to attack people. Like, I don't think dogs should be used as weapons. And this uh, article just really seems like it has a lot of great arguments for what I think a lot of us would like to see. Okay. State sanctioned canine attacks like those implemented by modern police canine units were common in chattel slavery. Legal scholar Madeline, I don't know how to pronounce that last name, it looks Polish, speaks of how white enslavers conceived of an enslaved person's attempt to obtain freedom as a type of high value property theft, appropriately recaptured with brute force. The use of dog attacks to preserve enslavers' economic interests was legal, and thus not a rare act committed by a few bigots. Uh, Wassel Sek, I don't know how um, Eastern European languages, I don't know what these letters actually are, how they're pronounced. So I'm going to say Wasselsek, but I don't think that's correct. Explains that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 federally legalized slave patrols' ability to seize slaves in free states, often accompanied by hunting dogs, and the act was later nicknamed the Bloodhound Bill as a result. So we had laws uh, on our books that were named after dogs, and those laws represented the use of dogs to violently oppress people. Is that not kind of wild? So, Michael Swistara stresses that these dog attacks were intentionally gruesome. Swistara explains how, as early as the 1700s, records show enslavers bred Cuban bloodhounds with the explicit purpose of raising them to enact violence against black people, and that the scars of dog bites were so common that they were physical badges of slavery, becoming marks used to identify black escapees and advertisements for rewards. Guys, think about that. Dog scars from dog bites were so common that they were considered physical badges of slavery. Like if you had a scar from a dog bite, that was considered evidence for you having been enslaved because using dogs against slaves was that common. In addition to the violence these dogs inflicted, the dogs themselves were also okay, I guess they just have to include this stuff because I don't agree with this. The dogs were forced non-consenting partners. Like the dogs don't know what they're it the dog is happy to attack and bite and maul anyone. So I don't like this framing of dogs as like innocent sweeties. Like they would have just been good boys if they weren't like trained to hunt slaves. Like anyways, Swistara correctly argues that police dogs were and still are themselves subjugated under the carceral state as disposable weapons used to perpetuate racial and economic inequality. Um, so yes, dogs are used as disposable weapons, but they're not like victims in this because they're just dogs. They don't know what's going on. They don't know, and they don't have a moral compass where if they did know what was going on, they would feel bad about it. um, I don't know. I just sometimes feel that kind of humanizing the dogs like this in these articles takes away from a little bit from the focus, which should be the injustice done against people. Because we know dog nutters are almost more upset when they hear about oh, poor doggy than like people dying, you know? Okay. Slaveholders had to deliberately break the bond between humans. Oh God. I don't know if I can read this paragraph here. Um, I'm just gonna skip that part. Furthering this divide, slaveholders would feed their dogs rich diets of meat while denying the same to enslaved people. We literally see that today. We watched videos. I've done segments before where it's like a chef making these gourmet raw food meals, like feeding like a pit bull giant steaks, in like areas where children might be like hungry that day. Um, Anyways, it's just crazy how these kind of like same themes flow through time. The okay, yeah, the institution of slavery. I don't really buy this part. Wants to suppress bonds between enslaved people and dogs. Why would enslaved people have a bond with a dog when the dog is used to like attack and hunt it down? Like, no. Okay. But this part is interesting. So these states made it illegal for enslaved people to have dogs, claiming that dog ownership constituted weapon possession. So think about that. They admit that owning a dog is the same as possessing a weapon. So they know they're admitting that dogs are weapons and dogs are used as weapons. Um, okay, let's see. Okay, this is kind of turning into, oh, like dogs are the victims kind of in this. So I don't know. I might come back to this. I might not. Like I said, I hadn't read these articles ahead of time, and that one it's not really passing the vibe check for me. Okay. Attack dogs and the history of racial violence. This is from Black Perspectives in 2019 by Tyler Perry. In 1970, French author Romain Gary published his novel White Dog, a semi-biographical work that imaginatively recreated the author's experiences with American race relations in 1960s Southern California. That's interesting that the title uh, of this book is White Dog. And anyways, okay. Gary metaphorically uses a German Shepherd called White Dog to explore his own perception of the American racial divide, elucidating his own meditations surrounding how racial animus is acquired in the United States. The novel held two main protagonists. The first was Gary himself, as it is written in the first person and was, at least partially, an autobiography of his experiences. The second is White Dog, a graying German Shepherd, aged about 6 or 7, that he rescued from a rainstorm in 1968. I'm getting confused, so blah blah blah. It's just about the book. Sorry, I thought this article was about uh attack dogs and being used. I don't know what this book is necessarily. So I'm gonna kind of skip down. Okay, let's start down here so we don't have to read the entire like synopsis of the book. Though based in the 1960s, the lessons in White Dog hold relevance for historicizing the canine's role in the advent of anti-black racism. In fact, the subject was so controversial that White Dog was refashioned as a motion picture in the 80s, but only saw limited release after protests from black civil rights groups claiming the film would have damaging repercussions for black Americans in a tense racial climate. The German Shepherd, now the principal reflection of a police dog, symbolized the omnipresent violence of vigilantes and state-supported police forces. So this is kind of interesting because in mythology, dogs are always also portrayed as kind of like symbols of violence and like symbols of the underworld and symbols of death. And even in modern times, we kind of make similar, comparisons uh, to dogs as these symbolic of like omnipresent violence. Okay. These dogs can inflict considerable psychological trauma against African Americans. In at least one case, officers placed them at the entry point of a courthouse to discourage a black community from entering and showing solidarity with the accused. Again, I mean, this is extremely powerful, like dog critique, in my opinion. Regarding cases of police brutality, reports from Los Angeles, California, and Ferguson, Missouri recently noted both canine forces predominantly attack black and brown bodies. The systemic use of dogs to intimidate, attack, subject, and brutalize black people is well documented in the historical record, and such knowledge is vividly recollected in black oral traditions and American popular culture. Formerly enslaved abolitionists often used the imagery of dog attacks to expose the inhumanity of American slavery. And after the Civil War, fierce dogs were used for chase scenes and stage plays and motion pictures based on Uncle Tom's Cabin. In other words, consumers craved the thrill of dogs chasing and nearly capturing black people in a rural landscape. Yeah, dog culture in this society has always been sick and twisted. This trope was deployed throughout the 20th century, demonstrating the intertwined histories of black fugitives and attack dogs. In 1971, Melvin Van Peebles displayed a lengthy interspecies conflict in his film Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, where he falsely accused protagonist outruns and where the falsely accused protagonist outruns and eventually kills a police dog chasing him through a desert landscape. References to racialized canine violence are found throughout popular culture, including episodes of King of the Hill, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and Hell on Wheels, alongside the uncomfortably gory scene of the movie Django Unchained, which shows an enslaved man torn apart by dogs for refusing the enslaver's orders. Such depictions use an interspecies lens to feed the American fetish for visualizing black suffering in print, photography, and film. White Dog was neither the first nor last work to portray this history, but it provides a compelling metaphor in understanding how race and racism are intimately linked to humans' interactions with animals. Powerful stuff, guys. Like, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it tracks with our lived experiences. You know, um, what else? I think this article I saw has to do with the civil rights movement. So this is from History News Network. What year is this from? 2023 by Joshua Clark Davis. Bull Connor's police dogs shocked the nation in 1963, but they were an American tradition. 60 years ago this month, in May 1963, police in Birmingham, Alabama used clubs, fire hoses, and dogs to attack crowds of black people demonstrating against racial segregation. The images of canines mauling protesters, ripping their clothes, and biting their bodies are some of the most disturbing visuals of the entire civil rights movement. Guys, the imagery of canines mauling protesters are some of the most disturbing visuals of the entire civil rights movement. There is so much that that is disturbing about what was going on during that time period in American history and the way black people were treated in this country historically. And dogs are a part of the worst images of that time. A photograph of Officer Dick Middleton setting a dog upon 15-year-old Walter Gadsden. I have to pause again mid sentence, but this so perfectly parallels what is happening in Palestine right now. Like, it's just wild to see kind of like the way colonialism and racism is enacted on Palestinians today directly mirrors how it was enacted against black people in this time period in the US. Kanan says many accounts from former enslaved individuals describe the horrifying role dogs played in their lives. Yeah, I remember, I think one of the articles I read earlier referenced like diaries and things. The Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs mentions dogs in relation to the threats enslaved people faced. Yeah, exactly. This is such an important part of our history that we should all really understand and learn about. And it gives us really powerful insight into dogs and the use of dogs in violence against people. Um, okay, so yeah, in Palestine, they're using dogs to attack literal children. And here in the US, they're setting a dog on a 15-year-old named Walter Gadsden. And this image appeared on the front page of the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post on May 4th. Newspapers in Asia, Europe, Africa, and Latin America followed suit, prominently featuring pictures of Birmingham's canines attacking protesters. Guys, just think about this. Like, the sight of dogs being used as weapons against um, people in Birmingham is so shocking and terrible that it was on the front page of newspapers throughout the world. Asia, Europe, Africa, and Latin America. That's how disturbing and horrific this is. I feel like we've been all very kind of desensitized um, through repeated exposure to like violence and violent imagery. I know I was probably exposed to that stuff way younger than I should have been because I had access to the internet. Um, but it worries me sometimes how desensitized people are to violence. So the images of dogs attacking protesters at this time was so shocking it was on the front page of newspapers worldwide. But today it's happening in Palestine constant and it's like not even reported. Well, it is, but it's just not really in the US. So, I guess that makes sense actually. Okay, concerned about, of course, damage to the country's reputation, the United States Information Agency conducted a study of global coverage of the events in Birmingham, concluding that pictures of police brutality, particularly the use of police dogs, has militated strongly against the U.S. image. The outcry was compounded by the fact that many of the protesters were school age, as Martin Luther King Jr.'s lieutenant, James Bevel, had organized thousands of students to march in the Children's Crusade against Jim Crow. The attacks by Birmingham's police dogs prompted three main responses from Americans. Conservative critics of the civil rights movement defended the dogs as a necessary law enforcement tool against criminals. Many white liberal observers in the North, by contrast, decried them as cruel weapons of a renegade police force, while insisting that the Birmingham police were a department of bad apples amid an otherwise honorable profession. Yeah. But it was civil rights organizers themselves whose response was most consequential. The dog attacks in Birmingham offered activists in the South and North a political language for analyzing police abuses within the larger context of black people's pursuit of freedom and equality. In Philadelphia, the NAACP picketers demanded rights, not bites, while protesters in New York denounced, quote, dog government in Alabama. Some argued that Alabama authorities were not the only ones bearing responsibility for the attacks and highlighted the presence of the dogs to sharpen their critiques. As James Baldwin told a rally of predominantly white marchers in Los Angeles, quote, those crimes in Birmingham, those dogs and fire hoses are being committed in your name. A headline in Baltimore's Afro American newspaper captured the mood. Birmingham's police dogs shock the world. Indeed, just as horrific videos of police killing Eric Garner, George Floyd, Tyre Nichols would galvanize protests across the country and globe decades later, the outrage in the wake of the news of Birmingham's canine unit brutalizing protesters as young as 4 injected a local movement into the national and even global consciousness. And yet, as Birmingham's police dogs have endured as a powerful symbols of backlash against the civil rights movement, their origins have largely escaped scrutiny. So it looks like this is not the entire article. There's a link to the entire article here. So you can find that when I share all of these in the description. Okay. The police, this is from JSTOR Daily, a nonprofit library for the intellectually curious. I always appreciate a nonprofit. I really hate how everything's behind a paywall now, it seems like. Okay. In politics and history, the police dog as a weapon of racial terror, police canine units in the United States emerged during the civil rights era. This was not a coincidence. This is some interesting history on the evolution of like dogs and police culture in the US, I feel. This could be really good ammo for us, to continue expanding on these lines of thinking. So from February of 2023 by Matthew Wills. Some of the most horrifically indelible images of the civil rights struggle show police dogs attacking young demonstrators in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. Birmingham became emblematic of animalistic police brutality against nonviolent protesters. But it wasn't unique at the time, and the racial weaponization of dogs isn't just something of that time, as examples from Abu Ghraib in 2004 to Ferguson in 2014 show. Scholar Tyler Wall doesn't think it's coincidental that canine units were introduced in police departments across the country during the civil rights era of the 1950s and 1960s. However, okay, guys, did you know that? I'm just learning this. I did not know that canine units were introduced in police departments in the US during the civil rights era. I don't know, I feel like that's an important piece of that might be an important like fact to know. Quoting advocates of the day, Wall writes that dogs were deployed as tools to, quote, civilize the savagery of an urban disorder by pacifying urban space. In practice, this meant dogs were deployed in the, quote, criminalization of the so-called Negro problem, end quote, to, quote, police the material and symbolic boundaries of the color line, end quote, and to enforce the dehumanization of people of color. Oh man, guys, listen to this. The mystical power of the police dog was its apparent ability to recognize the boundaries dividing those bodies in need of protection, white propertied bodies, from those darker bodies prowling on the boundaries of white bourgeois order. That is crazy. This should be a quote for the dog culture critics to reference. Because dog nutters still say stuff like that. Dogs have this magical ability to detect if someone's good or bad. We know that that's not true, and the police know that that's not true. They just use it, they use that mystical thinking about dogs as a cover for the fact that they know their dogs are just like violent and can be used as a tool, um, as a weapon. Okay. The dog is the most potent, versatile weapon ever invented, declared one enthusiastic Baltimore canine officer at the time. There were experiments with police dogs in England as early as the 1870s and Paris in the 1910s. Police dogs appeared on the streets of New York in 1907, but law enforcement canine corps didn't become institutionalized until after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 and the Montgomery bus boycott. Baltimore and St. Louis were the pioneers. By early 1960, at least 24 police departments had canine units. Many more would soon follow, by no means confined to the South. From the White House on down, police dogs were portrayed as crime fighters and riot controllers. The dog is the most potent, versatile weapon ever invented, declared one enthusiastic Baltimore canine officer at the time, noting that a gun couldn't shoot around a corner, but a dog could. Dude, this is wild stuff. Okay. The preferred breed for such four-legged smart weaponry was the German Shepherd slash Alsatian. And every time I hear the word Alsatian or the name of whatever the breed, it looks just like a German Shepherd to me. But I can't hear the word Alsatian without immediately remembering the Process Church of the Final Judgment. They were like obsessed with Alsatian dogs for some reason, and they were somehow connected to like the Sons of Sam murders in New York. And I remember when I was reading about that, they found like right behind David Berkowitz's apartment, which happened to be also next door to this like I think Sam, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyways, they found this like path that led to like this weird abandoned like city building of some kind. And inside of that, they found like satanic symbols and like cult symbols and evidence of animal sacrifice. And the animals were all like these Alsatian dogs. Anyways, it's just super weird. So every time I hear Alsatian, I just think about that. But these were originally bred by a German at the turn of the 20th century to have the quote qualities of the German nation as he saw them: obedience, loyalty, courage, and discipline. The German police dog, thus initially a bad reputation in the US, on par with pit bulls circa 1989. Hollywood's Rin Tin Tin, found on a World War I battlefield by a doughboy, helped change the German Shepherd's reputation over the course of 27 films starting in the silent era, while later dogs said to be Rin Tin Tin's progeny brought the character into the television age. The German connection was overt in Mississippi in 1961. That year, the Jackson police borrowed Happy and Rebel, two German shepherds from the Vicksburg police, to use against black college students staging a sit-in in a segregated public library. A local newspaper reported, and not in a critical way, that the dogs had been trained by an East German refugee who was a quote former Nazi stormtrooper who trained Dobermans to guard Hitler's airports. I feel like I'm in a fever dream reading that. I want to read that one more time. A local newspaper reported, and not in a critical way, that the dogs had been trained by an East German refugee who was a former Nazi stormtrooper who trained Dobermans to guard Hitler's airports. Oh, that's a really ridiculous sentence. This country has such strange history. Okay. Citing current police dog literature and fan pages, Wall notes the prevalence of terms such as savages to denote the non-white targets of police dogs. That's what Israelis call Palestinian savages. That's a term they use for them. Racial dehumanization is thus enforced by an ideology that argues only animals can control the subhuman. Wall writes that it in fact is the animalization of police power that is the real mark of brutishness. In an echo of slave or Negro, dogs used to hunt the self emancipated in the 19th century, 20th, and 21st century canine terror. In race policing, enshrines the brute instinct at the heart of police power. I feel like I misread part of that, so my apologies. Even with post-racial reforms in accountability, training, and education, police dogs are still routinely deployed to attack humans and disproportionately biting black and brown subjects, writes Wall. He cites Justice Department reviews of the Ferguson Police, the Los Angeles Police, where officers referred to black people as dog biscuits in the early 1990s. And Los Angeles County Sheriff Department, which show that black and Latin I don't know how to pronounce that. Latinx subjects are bitten at astounding rates, much higher than whites are. So yeah, police dogs are just out wantonly attacking people more than a lot of people realize. But there's a higher proportion of black and brown people who get uh, bitten by these essentially dog weapons. I mean, the police are using them as a weapon. Okay, to those subject to this terror, the police dog literally haunts them, often evoking in those attacked nightmares of being eaten alive. So yeah, they're traumatized. I mean, dogs are just an absolute nightmare tool used by really bad people. And the people using the dogs as weapons know um, that they're a weapon. I mean, these cops here were under no illusions that these were some kind of like cute, fluffy, he's gonna be, this German Shepherd's gonna be able to tell whether this black person's a criminal and this one isn't. No, they knew that it would attack whatever person they wanted it, like whatever person it could first get to. Um, they know that these are weapons, but they like using them because they have some level of they can deny that they intended for the dog to attack someone. They can say it was an accident, the dog got loose. Like they can know that they're intentionally causing the dog to attack a person, but because the dog is the one committing the act of violence, it puts a layer between the cop and the victim. Does that make sense? The dogs are a weapon that the officer can use better, like more uh, safely than a gun. Because if the cop shoots the person, if the cop shoots a suspect, it's obvious that the cop intended to shoot. Like the cop is the one that carried out that action. If the cop's dog attacks a person, the cop can deny that he meant for that to happen, or like, you know what I mean? There's a layer between. The dog acts as a shield that allows this person, this cop, to enact violence. Anyways, I just think that's an important thing to realize. Basically, it's a weapon that they can deny using. Like, they can't deny using their gun if they shoot someone, but they can basically deny that they meant to use it as a weapon. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, because it's a dog that has a will of its own, they can just say, oh, the dog did that of its own volition, not mine. Okay. Okay, what is this? This is the truth out. Um, prisons and policing. Using dogs as a tool of racist repression. Along with training canines to horrifically maul people, cops have frequently been caught committing animal abuse. Okay. By Alex Moyle from July of 2018. This dog is apparently guarding a site under the M1 motorway on June 11th in Bedfordshire, England. I hate mutts. Hey, says plausible deniability. Yeah, kind of. I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to say poorly. Um, because it happens a lot. Like, haven't we seen stories where the police dog like would attack some random victim? And I don't think the cops really ever got in trouble for that. Like maybe the city had to settle, but that's like taxpayers' money. Like, you know what I mean? The police department didn't really like pay for it or suffer. So anyways, um okay. In 2016, veterinarian Dan Wentz started a fundraiser to implant titanium crowns on the teeth of a 106-pound German Shepherd police dog in Ferguson, Missouri. I think I saw a picture of this. I posted on my community page. Given all that's happened, said Wentz, I want to make sure we are doing what we can to help keep these dogs on the street. Ferguson, of course, is where the 2014 police murder of unarmed 18-year-old Michael Brown touched off an uprising that sparked the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement around the nation and brought horrific police repression of protesters in response. Wentz's campaign was launched after the uprising. It came after the Ferguson Police Department had taken a police dog to the memorial left to Brown to piss on it. What the hell? I did not know that that happened. Were you guys aware of that? I never heard about that. That's insane. So they took a police dog to the memorial left for Michael Brown, who was killed by police, an 18-year-old, and let the dog piss on the memorial. That is insane. And it was after a Justice Department investigation into the Ferguson police found that officers only sicked dogs on black people, including children, and that the dogs were used, quote, not to counter a physical threat, but to inflict punishment. Guys, it's like Palestine. And did you know that our police are being trained like by Israel? American police are? I want to cover that not tonight, because I want to keep the focus on like the Juneteenth spirit for the holiday. Even though I'm sorry to be talking about these dark subjects on a holiday, maybe I shouldn't, but I feel like this is an important part of history, as it relates to the misuse of or the use of dogs as weapons and the mistreatment of Black Americans. Um, okay. So the Ferguson, a Justice Department investigation found that the Ferguson Police Department only sicked dogs on black people, including children, and that the dogs were used not to counter a physical threat but to inflict punishment. I had to read that again. This story isn't an exception, though. Throughout the country, police departments cynically exploit people's love of dogs to make the abuse of human beings by police canine units and the abuse of the dogs themselves seem acceptable, obscuring a mass of brutality, corruption, and abuse. The Rin Tin Tin propaganda used by police departments for community outreach efforts must be confronted with the real history of decades of brutality toward human and animal alike as a result of the use of police dogs. Like many aspects of modern policing, police dogs have their historical roots in slavery and colonialism. Cuban bloodhounds were tools in the hands of professional slave catchers for recapturing and brutalizing fleeing slaves, and instruments of psychological terror to prevent others from trying to escape. From slavery to Jim Crow to the era of mass incarceration, attack dogs have been a continuous feature of anti-black violence. It's still the case today that police dogs are used disproportionately to maul and terrorize people of color. The Ferguson Police Department's apartheid policy of dog attacks for black people only isn't unique. A 2013 report similarly found that 100% of the victims of police dog bites in Los Angeles County in the first 6 months of that year were black or Latino. 100%. 100% of the victims of police dog bites in Los Angeles County in the first 6 months of 2013 were black or Latino. That's crazy. I have to pause so it can kind of sink in. The stark numbers show that no progress has been made in LA since former police chief Daryl Gates and the LAPD were sued by the ACLU and the NAACP in 1991 for unleashing canine units against the black and brown communities of Los Angeles, mauling more than 900 people over the course of 3 years. 900 people in 3 years. Meanwhile, a 2016 report by the Center for Policing Equity, using data collected from 11 large, unnamed police departments, found that police were more likely to use dogs against black suspects, as they were more likely to use force in general. Despite this history, it is even more difficult to convict police officers of wrongdoings or to win civil judgments in brutality cases where canines are involved. Okay, this is the important point. And like I Hate Mutts said earlier, I think uh, this is going to be like the plausible deniability type stuff. Like the cops can get away with violence when they use dogs more than when if they were to use a different weapon. Let's see. K9 says lots of information here that I could use in my next video. Yeah, I think there's a lot of information here in this topic. Um, no one's being notified lately. Yeah, notifications are really, I don't understand what the algorithm does sometimes because it seems kind of hit or miss. But I also notice that I have to be pretty actively like, if I'm not looking at my phone or have my phone near me, like I'm not going to notice the notification. So that could be, I don't know. I don't know what YouTube does. Okay. Um, so in LA, K9 units mauled more than 900 black and brown people over the course of 3 years. And remember, they just said a study found that 100% of the victims in LA County were black or Latino. Meanwhile, a 2016 report by the Center for Policing Equity, using data collected from 11 large, unnamed police departments, found that police were more likely to, oh, I just read this part. Yeah, more likely to use dogs against black suspects as they were more likely to use force in general. Despite this history, it is even more difficult to convict police officers of wrongdoing or to win civil judgments in brutality cases where canines are involved. Attorney Donald W. Cook has termed it the Rin Tin Tin effect, stating that jurors often seem unable to see police dogs as anything but noble, or to understand the severity of the maiming they can inflict unless there is graphic video evidence. Guys, read this part until it really sinks in. It is even more difficult to convict police officers of wrongdoings or to win civil judgments in brutality cases when canines are involved. The cops get away with brutality more often when they use canines as the weapon. Attorney Donald W. Cook has termed it the Rin Tin Tin effect, stating that jurors who are probably a lot like how many people are on a jury normally? Can somebody tell me in the chat? I don't remember. I feel like I should know. Is this like civics? I should really like learn civics better. Um, but let's say you have a jury, let's say like, is it 12? I don't know. Let's say you have a jury of 12. How confident are you that the majority of those 12, Kanan, thank you. 6 or 12. Okay, let's say 12. How confident are you that like 5 of them are dog nutters and the rest aren't? Or would you be more likely to think that the majority of them are going to be dog nutters? So the Rin Tin Tin effect means that these dog nutters who sit on juries will be unable to see the police dog as anything but noble. They have this such dog nutters having this magical thinking about dogs actually endangers all of us. If it were to even come to like even down to like winning a legal case or winning a judgment in your favor if you were attacked by a dog. Think about that. Yeah, Kanan says it's going to be like 95% dog nutters. Exactly. So good luck getting a conviction of the police officer when that police officer is a dog. Because remember, these canines aren't even treated like they're just a tool or a weapon or a dog. They're treated as though they are a police officer. If you kill a police dog, you will be am I wrong? Like you will be charged with like the same as if you killed a cop. So these dog nutter jurors are going to be like because of the Rin Tin Tin effect, they're going to be unable to convict that dog. So you're going to be out of luck after if you get maimed or worse. And this is another extremely important point. Like I'm spending a lot of time on this little paragraph right here because it's got so much important things to take away from it. Not only can the dog nutter jurors not see the dog as anything but noble, they fail to understand how severe a maiming that can happen unless they have graphic video evidence of it. Because again, dog nutters live in a Disneyland fantasy. And you've seen this every single time you read about a horrible dog attack, the people all around are saying, I could have never imagined. It was the worst, most horrible, grisly scene I've ever seen in my life. I had no idea a dog could even do that. These people are unaware. They're living in a fantasy land. They don't understand how dangerous dogs are and how, like, it can kill you quickly. So the jurors, unless, and, I don't know, cops can be really dirty. Like, what if this video evidence disappears, you know? I mean, I'm glad that they're usually allowed, or I mean, required to wear body cams, but I'm sure that footage goes missing sometimes or isn't um, clear or something. You know what I mean? So, anyways, the jurors aren't going to be able to recognize that that dog is a savage beast. So you're going to have a hard time getting a judgment in your favor. That should scare everybody in our like everyone in society should like not like that. Okay. Police use terms like apprehend and restrain to try to portray it as a very antiseptic event. Cook told NPR. But you look at the video and the dog is chewing away on his leg and mutilating him. It is horrific, guys. And this is coming from a attorney. This is interesting. He would be a really good person to like potentially interview um about like what he's seen in these cases. That would be a really great interview for like dog culture critique, I would think. Hey, Cruello. Thanks everyone again for joining the chat. Yusuf is on. I'm happy to have everyone here. Okay, so the video is horrific, and without that graphic video evidence, it's unlikely a jury is going to convict the canine police officer. So, although recent history is rife with examples of needless mutilations, courts, like juries, have generally given police a wide berth to use dogs to inflict grisly injuries. In 2017, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled for police in the case of Maney v. Garrison, a gruesome case where a police officer allowed a canine, oh my God, to rip the scalp from the head of a defenseless homeless man. According to the decision, police had no obligation to immediately stop a canine from mauling a person they knew wasn't a suspect. Guys, I'm going to pause again. There's a lot to unpack here, as they say. There is a lot going on in this paragraph. Okay. This was in 2017. The Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the police in a case where the police allowed their dog to rip the scalp off of an unhoused man. The court ruled in favor of the police. According to their decision, police have no obligation to immediately stop a canine from mauling a person they know isn't a suspect. That is a ruling from the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm pausing so it can sink in. Everyone in America should be should be upset about that ruling. Even though the cops knew he wasn't a suspect, the court ruled that they were not obligated to stop the dog from mauling him. And the dog ripped his scalp off. I get upset by these things. Um, The courts have similarly looked the other way on police using canines to violate legal protections against unreasonable searches. So dogs are basically, it sounds like dogs are a known tool that has precedent or whatever, legal precedent for being allowed to be used to violate people's rights. Do you see how sick and depraved and deep this dog culture goes? It is enshrined in an unjust legal system. Dogs are a helpful tool for an unjust legal system. I wish I made my tea before this. I feel like I've been talking for a long time. Um, and my throat's getting a little tired, but that's okay. We must press on. Um, in a rare moment of near impossible naivete, the late Justice Antonin Scalia once asked why cops would want dogs that give false positives, indicating that drugs are present when they aren't. Police answer that question themselves by referring to their canine partners as, quote, probable cause on a leash. Do you see that? The cops know they are using the dogs. They are using the dogs knowingly to violate people's right. They're saying the dogs are probable cause on a leash. In other words, all they need to say that they have probable cause is a dog. Because they know the dogs give constant false positives. They want the constant false positives because it allows them to unlawfully search people. The courts have held that a police dog's signal to his handler constitutes probable cause, allowing for a warrantless search, despite studies showing that up to 80% of positive identifications by police dogs are false positives, and that police dogs will indicate a positive identification based on the expectations of their handler. Yes, canine, that's how they circumvent probable cause, exactly. This also is saying that police dogs will indicate a positive identification based on the expectations of their handler. So, like, the dog can, I don't know, I guess they're saying that the dog has uh, an ability to know Maybe they get trained. Maybe they get rewarded for like giving a positive reaction. I don't know. They're doing 80% false positives, like something's going on. They're terrible at it, and or they're being trained to just give positive results all the time or at a certain signal. Um, Thus, in practice, cops can search anyone at any time so long as they have a canine on hand. And the drug seizures and civil asset forfeitures made possible by police canines pay huge dividends to apartments. They're using the dogs to steal property. A single police canine in Monrovia, California, led cops to over $1 billion in drug seizures over the course of 6 years. Around the nation, cops in 2014 used civil asset forfeiture to take more property than all the burglars in the nation combined. The cops are stealing more than every single thief in the country combined. And they're using dogs to do it with these civil asset forfeitures. That's actually scary, right? Um, in addition to the massive human and economic tolls, it should be pointed out that the public image of police as good keepers of their beloved canine partners has no basis in reality. Police dogs frequently die when they're left in hot cars, struck by vehicles, or killed in training exercises. Along with the inherently abusive nature of training dogs to maul people, cops have frequently been caught committing animal abuse on the job against police canines, including choking and beating them as one might expect the handlers of dogs trained for violence on command to do. Again, they're going to portray the dogs as victims here, saying that they have to be abused to behave aggressively. We know that that's not true. Some of these dogs just behave aggressively because that's what they were bred to do. The abuse of the dogs is incidental and primarily probably because the people who own these violent, aggressive, trained attack dogs are violent people by nature. So they're going to enact their violence on innocent people, on suspects, on homeless people, and on animals and on their own dogs. But that's not what makes the dogs violent. The dogs are already bred to be violent. Showing how little they care about the welfare of their partners. In Illinois, where Macomb County Sheriff Howard Buffett, the son of, oh my God, the sheriff of Macomb County is the son of Warren Buffett? I didn't know that. For some reason, I never imagined that these children of billionaires have like jobs. But I mean, this seems like that a sheriff is a powerful job, so it may be more like an appointment. Like we are pretty much ruled by like the wealthy elite. So the corrupt sheriff of a county might be the son of a billionaire. That's the reality in this country. That's crazy to me. But anyways, so Macomb County Sheriff Howard Buffett, the son of billionaire Warren Buffett, spends millions through his private organization to stock the state with canine units. Police recently threatened to euthanize their canines if marijuana was legalized in the state. What the heck? Cops were threatening to kill their dogs if the state of Illinois legalized marijuana. I swear sometimes I read this stuff and it doesn't even seem real. Cops shouldn't be allowed to pose as friends to Fido, given that they routinely shoot and kill family dogs, even in instances where the dog very clearly posed no threat. Again, whatever. I don't care that much. And often, I mean, we've seen videos where the dog is like about to bite and the cop shoots it and the cop gets like, you know, crucified for it basically. But anyways, according to Department of Justice estimates, cops kill more than 25 dogs each day in the US. Blah blah blah. I don't really care about dogs getting shot, so I'm gonna kind of scroll past that. I know that makes me sound like a horrible person to like dog lovers, but I don't care. Um, okay, here we go. This is important. Let's see. Civilians' dogs are considered chattel property. And because of that, aggrieved owners often have little remedy outside of small claims court where they can argue they're entitled to the market value of the dog, which I don't know, dogs don't have a very high market value. That's dumb. But like the I think this is an interesting point here. The the thing to understand here, um, civilians' dogs are considered chattel property. Okay? A dog legally is considered property if you own it. But a police dog is not considered chattel property. A police dog is considered a police officer. So, by contrast, harming a police dog, including protecting yourself from one that is attacking you, is a federal offense, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. So, if you own a dog and the cop shoots the dog, it's no big deal because the dog is chattel property. If the cop owns the dog and it attacks and mauls you, and you harm it or kill it, defending yourself from being mauled by a dog, you will go to prison for 10 years because you've killed a police officer. So they're dog nutters are inconsistent about what they believe in and say they believe about dogs because at all times the dog is being used as a tool to harm you in some way. I hope that makes sense. Like, I hope I'm explaining what I mean well. These cops know that their dog is the same as your dog. It's a dog. And all dogs are capable of violence and aggression. They are allowed to use theirs as a weapon against people, and you are not. And they are allowed to define theirs as a equivalent to a human being, to a human police officer, and you are not entitled to anything more than calling it property. So this is inconsistent because dogs are a weapon used against us. Okay. Um, Around the nation, numerous Blue Lives Matter bills are ratcheting up such penalties at the state level. Ratcheting up 10 years in prison. They want a worse punishment for harming a police dog than 10 years in federal prison. Along with their capacity for brutalization and the practical elimination of protections against unreasonable searches, police dogs are an invaluable propaganda tool, available for elementary school tours, public events, and local morning news talk show demos. They are viewed by police chiefs as an incomparably favorable asset for public relations and as mascots for their own program and department. This is really powerful stuff, guys. So, dogs are invaluable propaganda tools. I mean, I couldn't agree more. This seems, I mean, some of this stuff reads like it's written by dog culture critics. Um, this remarkable sleight of hand, using animals that have been trained to be a key instrument of brutality to build a more favorable public perception, shows how this system manages to turn the very features that ought to be damning indictments into beacons for public support. They really transmute that energy. That's crazy. They it's a sleight of hand. Uh, but this exploitation has been hugely successful. People's love for dogs is based on 32,000 years of shared evolution, brood parasitism, that has produced remarkable animals that people consider to be part of the family because they're brood parasites. But in the hands of racist and brutal police departments, the physical abilities, intelligence, and what I guess they call loyalty of dogs are put to the worst possible use. I would say, in the hands of racist and brutal police departments, the characteristics of dogs are put to the worst possible use because dogs' characteristics are bad. They naturally they've been bred to have these characteristics. That's why they're such useful tools in the hands of racist and brutal police departments. Despite this brutal history, a popular movement against the use of police dogs doesn't yet exist, but it is growing because that includes us, guys. Like a movement against the use of police dogs is what we're doing. I mean, I want to see an end to the use of dogs in policing. So, a popular movement against the use of police dogs does yet exist, and it's growing. After the horrifying images of police dogs used against civil rights demonstrators in Birmingham, Alabama, and other cities in the 1960s, legislation was put forward to limit police dog use in California and Hawaii. But the proposals were crushed by pressure from law enforcement groups, and the use of police dogs has expanded ever since. Even PETA, which has absurdly equated animal abuse with human slavery and opposed the use of service dogs for the blind, which, what? Okay. Doesn't take a principled stand against the use of police dogs. Yeah, because PETA is probably like a controlled opposition type of thing. Like, it allows people to be enraged about certain things, but ignores like this enshrined use of dogs as tools of like colonial oppression. It instead urges departments to fit canines with a hot car alert system and thank them for their service. See, ridiculous, trivial uh, concerns with the dog's welfare to see, this is why I don't like framing the dogs as victims in any of this, because framing the PETA is successfully removing attention from uh, cops abusing people with dogs. PETA's ignoring that, the harm done to humans, and getting you to focus on supposed harm done to the dogs. See, it's like meant to distract your energy and misdirect it to concern for the dog's welfare instead of concern for people's welfare that are being mauled by these dogs. All around the world, from Ferguson to Standing Rock, from the US Mexico border to Palestine, respect for mentioning Palestine, from Guantanamo Bay to Abu Ghraib, attack dogs remain quintessential tools of racial violence. The use of police dogs is simultaneously human rights abuse, animal abuse, I don't agree, but okay, and a propaganda tool in the furtherance of escalating repression. Far from allowing police departments to exploit dogs as mascots that obscure police brutality, socialists, anti-racists, and those opposed to animal cruelty should all strongly oppose the formation of canine units and demand that existing ones be disbanded as an important component of disarming militarized police forces. Agree. I definitely agree. And I think that a variety of groups, and despite whatever political leanings and whatever you might have, like this is a universal. This is a human rights issue. Um, Although black and brown people suffer at disproportionately high rates, recall Los Angeles County, it was 100% of the time the victims of police dog attacks were black or Latino. Still, this is a human rights issue that should concern every person. Okay, I think this is the last article. I've been on here for what, like, how long have I been on tonight? I'm not sure. I've been enjoying this one though. I think it's almost 2 hours. Wow. So I want to go over this one, and then I think I'll probably call it a night. But I hope you all have enjoyed this episode. Again, I hope you had a good holiday. Hope you got the day off. Um, and yeah, this has been a really important topic, and I hope it'll open some new perspectives on the dog issue. Police Dogs and Anti-Black Violence. This is from Black Perspectives, Tyler Perry in 2017. I feel like, did we go over this one? Why does this look, maybe I looked at this before the stream. I don't think I've read this one yet. I'm gonna go through it. Okay. Protest observer Walter Gadsden, 17, in Birmingham, Alabama, on May 3rd, 1963, being attacked by police dogs during a civil rights protest. Corello says Django Unchained. Yeah, I think an article I just read earlier mentioned that. I haven't seen that movie. Um, Maybe I should watch it. Is there a scene in that movie about like a dog attack? Again, I haven't seen it. Don't worry about spoiling it for me if you want to type something in the comments about it. I don't mind if you type any spoilers. And I'll warn people if I'm going to read it and there are spoilers. But anyways, um, okay. On July 11th, 2017, a video circulated throughout social media depicting the San Diego police deploying a canine against an unarmed suspect. Posted by a bystander named Angel Nunez, it revealed a large police dog lacerating a black man's arm while he was handcuffed and subdued on the pavement. Oh, you're all saying, yeah, there's a grizzly dog scene. A runaway slave. Yeah, Carello, at the beginning of this live stream, I talked a lot about the, what were they called? Like the Cuban bloodhounds that were specifically used to track runaway slaves. And there was some really powerful artwork depicting that during uh, that time period. It can be found on YouTube. Yeah, I'm definitely not gonna watch that tonight. Like I said, I have a real visceral reaction to a lot of this stuff. It really disturbs me. Um, I think it should disturb people. However disturbing it may be, I think we should be talking about it though. People need to know. Um, it kind of makes me feel like when I was just reading about how the jurors tend to not be able to comprehend the level of brutality that occurs during a dog attack. Um, they don't understand how violent it actually is. Like they don't conceive, they can't conceive of how horrific a dog attack really is, how horrific a mauling is, because they live in this Disneyland world where they've never experienced that like actual violence in their lives. You know, um, America, thankfully, and Americans should be very grateful for this. Other than like since the Civil War, hasn't really experienced like a lot of um, severe violence to the extent I'm talking about compared to other countries, other peoples who have been suffering, like the Palestinians have for the last 78 years under extreme violence and brutality and oppression. Um, so in the same way, I think that a lot of Americans have a difficult time conceiving of how horrific slavery was as an institution. Like we learn about slavery, yes, but I think that we're shielded from how horrific it truly was and how not that long ago it really was. I just think that's important to consider um, when discussing these topics. So I think it's important to cover kind of the level of brutality as horrific as it is, and as much as people don't like, nobody likes to learn about brutality and things. Um, you can't really understand what was going on if you ignore and kind of gloss over the worst parts of it. So, anyways, I'm kind of rambling. But that's my intention with this is to, uh, I don't know, just bring light to the importance of this topic. My intention is not to cause any distress or be too graphic. It's just part of the material. Okay, it's part of the history. That's what this country's history actually is. Very brutal. Um, okay. The large police dog lacerating a black man's arm while handcuffed and subdued on the pavement. AZQQ, knowledge is power, exactly. 100% knowledge is power. Um, so this black man was already subdued on the pavement and handcuffed. The officers appeared to lose control of the animal. We know that they didn't. They do that on purpose. They pretend that they've lost control of the animal so that they won't be blamed. But okay, the cop, this cop wants to carry out and enact violence against this black 17-year-old boy, Walter Gadsden, because he might get scrutinized if he just pulls his gun out and shoots him in broad daylight for not doing anything wrong. He knows he can use this dog to harm Walter Gadsden and then deny that he meant for that to happen, even though he 100% did. Uh, that's the point. They use the dog as a proxy for their racist violence and then can deny it by saying, oh, we lost control of the dog. Okay. I just wanted to get that point across. Um, yes, the officers appeared to lose control of the animal while the man screamed in agony as the dog ripped his flesh. Since the video did not reveal the events leading up to the attack, some viewers suspected the man surely antagonized the animal. We see this still every single time. Like, even if a kid gets killed by dogs, they're like, "Ugh, well, what did the kid do? Why did the dogs do that? Was the kid doing something?" So some viewers suspected the man antagonized the animal. Shortly after the original post, however, Nunes provided a second video depicting the preceding events. It revealed no premise for the dog's attack. Unprovoked attack, as always. The suspect appeared to simply hold his arms in a defensive posture as the dog lunged and tackled him to the pavement. The image triggered various reactions throughout social media. Though skeptics attempted to explain the procedure and deny its racial overtones, many believed it manifested yet another example of police brutality. Though police shootings and violent beatings typically dominate mainstream perceptions of police violence, the use of canines to subdue people of color has a deeply racist history that not only engulfs the United States, but much of the Western Hemisphere. So again, the dog is the key tool. Scholars note that European colonists brought dogs to the Americas and used them as tools for intimidation and violence against indigenous populations. But the deliberately racialized breeding of canines occurred during the expansion of black chattel slavery. As slave rebellions erupted throughout the Western Hemisphere in the 18th and 19th centuries, a breed called the Cuban bloodhound, which we discussed earlier, was diffused throughout the slaveholding colonies. Named for the island from which they hailed, they were physically imposing and extremely aggressive. Used in Cuba to confine slaves to the plantations, they were eventually exported to quell black revolts. The British used them against the Jamaican Maroons in the late 18th century, and the French engaged their services during the Haitian Revolution in the early 19th century. Dogs are being used everywhere throughout history where populations of people were being enslaved. A few decades later, the U.S. government was engrossed in a lengthy conflict with the Black Seminole Indians in Florida. I've been actually meaning to learn more about this. I really should learn more about the history of Native Americans. Again, it's one of those topics that we kind of like learned about in school, but I feel like we probably didn't learn the real history, and I'd like to learn about how dogs were used to harm the indigenous peoples of the Americas, like I assume they were, um, in similar ways to those in which dogs were used to harm enslaved black people in the Americas and Caribbean. A few decades later, the U.S. government was engrossed in a lengthy conflict with the Black Seminole Indians in Florida, and military officials followed the French and British examples by importing Cuban bloodhounds to help crush the revolt. Exactly the way the Zionists are importing Dutch attack dogs to use against the indigenous Palestinian people. Following this event, entrepreneurial white Southerners interbred the dogs with local breeds, birthing the occupation of professional slave hunting in the antebellum South. Dog breeding, and these dog nutter dog breeders invented an occupation of professional slave hunting using their specially bred dogs. This is sick. This really is a sick history that we're not taught. The targeting of enslaved men and women was so pervasive that black authors called them Negro dogs, as the fugitive comprised the most lucrative target for the dog's owners. The animals held a prominent legacy in the testimonies of former slaves, as their oral histories recollected stories of pursuit, evasion, and oftentimes violent capture. The assault on black people was so widespread that a reader gains a sense of normalcy in the um, literature. According to one former slave from Mississippi, some folks treated the slaves mighty bad, put, I'm not reading that, N-word dogs on 'em. Far from a haphazard practice, the business of hunting black bodies was ritualized throughout the South. Oh, this topic, guys. They were bred. What are, I've read claims that those dogs are like extinct, but I find that actually suspicious. I want to look into that a bit more because what do you mean that these dogs were being imported and bred and then they just like what stopped breeding them? Like they won't even people won't even stop breeding pit bulls. But like these Cuban bloodhounds just like disappeared. I don't know. That just seems weird. I wonder if they're possibly still around. Okay, so there was like ritualized professional hunting of black people in the South using dogs bred specifically for that. Oh, these people are sick. Emancipation brought little relief. The legal subversion of black Americans continued after the Civil War, and the backbreaking requirements of Southern agricultural labor during the Jim Crow period largely mirrored its antebellum predecessor. One 1903 headline entitled Slavery in Alabama accused Southern sharecroppers of developing a system of neo slavery by preying upon impoverished African Americans who remained in perpetual debt. Planters in want of labor paid the fines and took the black people into slavery, ostensibly to work out their fines. Planters in want of labor. I don't. So this such economic exploitation perpetuated debt bondage that mirrored antebellum slavery, and the report detailed how the workers were treated with great severity and received whippings for disobedience. Upon any attempt to abscond from the plantation, they were hunted down in the old slavery days fashion with bloodhounds. So the dogs always being used. The dogs are hunting because they love to. And the slave owner is taking advantage of the dog's natural desire to hunt and using it against black people to uphold like a racist system. So dogs can't know good and bad, who's a good, who's bad, who's innocent, who's guilty. Like, that's magical thinking that people on juries believe when they won't convict the dog that mauled you. Okay. Being hunted down with bloodhounds became a familiar experience for black fugitives, but canine violence was also used to dismantle peaceful protests in the 1960s. Though the dogs of Birmingham often dominate images of violence during the civil rights era, the practice spanned much of the Deep South. In 1963, the New York Times reported that police in Greenwood, Mississippi, a city notorious for its violence against civil rights workers, used canines to perpetuate anti black oppression. James Farmer, a national director of the Congress for Racial Equality, condemned the attack of a black minister by police dogs, declaring, quote, when that dog's fangs sank to the ankle of the young minister, they also sank into the hearts of the black people of Greenwood. By the time of the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, canine units had threatened and intimidated black protesters throughout the South. This illustration is from narrative William W. Brown, An American Slave. It's called The Author Caught by the Bloodhounds from the Schlumberg Center for Research in Black Culture. Despite the public's outcry against Southern police tactics, the violent images of dogs attacking black victims did little to curb the persistence of this practice throughout the United States. Though police departments assumed that many lessons were learned since Birmingham, largely through better training approaches for handlers and their canines, yeah, right, modern statistics remain quite troubling when viewed through a racial context. The Los Angeles Police Department is one of the worst repeat offenders. Throughout the 1980s, African Americans leveled complaints that officers jokingly called black suspects dog biscuits as they deployed canines against them. The issue came to a head during the 1991 class action lawsuit Lawson versus Gates, which spotlighted the LAPD's unlawful use of canines as vehicles of terror and intimidation against minority communities. Evidence was especially damning, and the plaintiff's attorneys were able to prove that the LAPD deployed dogs principally in African American and Latino communities, even though, quote, crimes for which dogs are used occur at equal, if not greater rates in communities with substantially higher Caucasian populations. The case was settled with a monetary payment to 54 plaintiffs, and that the LAPD would institute reform measures for how officers deployed canines. I'm sure that they did not. Law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles would later celebrate these reforms throughout the 1990s, claiming that bite ratios were markedly down from previous years. However, recent data from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department provides a vastly different picture. I'm not surprised. A recent study from the LASD revealed that canine bites in the Los Angeles area were leveled solely against people of color for the first 6 months of 2013. Yeah, we read about that one earlier. So you have some details on that earlier in the video. But these contemporary problems do not lie solely in Southern California. Following the killing of Michael Brown in 2014, the Department of Justice uncovered that police units in Ferguson, Missouri, persistently used dogs to attack black suspects, including teenagers. Again, exactly like they do in Palestine. And don't forget that American police forces train with the Zionist police. There's actually a program for that, the GILEE program, GILEE. It's like the Georgia Institute for Law Enforcement Exchange or something like that. So look into that if you're curious. Um, yeah, so this DOJ report concluded that the Ferguson police appeared to use canines not to counter a physical threat, but to inflict punishment. So read that again. the DOJ found the Ferguson police used canines not to counter a physical threat, but to inflict punishment. So they use them as a form of torturing people. Okay, including animals in the histories of racial violence in both colonial histories and the African American experience contextualizes how conceptions of race are made, consolidated, and reimagined by human populations. We must realize that enactments of police brutality are not solely human to human phenomena, but such state sanctioned patterns of violence are deeply rooted in American history. Yes, state sanctioned use of dogs against especially black and brown people is deeply rooted in American history. That's probably one of the reasons this country's so crazy about dogs. They're a successful tool for propaganda. People do magical thinking when it comes to dogs. The police can get away with increased levels of brutality. They have plausible deniability for it. Very, very powerful stuff to think about. And with that, I am going to call it a night. Happy Juneteenth again, and I'll see you all soon.